Claire Whitman stepped into the Oak Ridge police station with a hesitation so slight it was barely visible, but it echoed in the way she tightened her coat around her bruised ribs and held her chin just a little too high. The morning sun spilled through the glass doors behind her, casting a faint glow on the tiled floor, but the air inside was cold, stale, the kind of cold that had nothing to do with temperature. The station hadn't changed in 15 years. Same mustard-colored walls, same grey linoleum floors, same chipped front desk, now manned by a balding officer who didn't bother to look up when she approached. Claire cleared her throat. "I'd like to report an assault." The man, his nameplate read Officer Darrell Monroe, finally looked up. His eyes travelled over her face, lingering just a second too long on the fading bruise along her left cheekbone. She watched his expression shift, not to concern, but something closer to condescension. "Domestic?" he asked flatly, already pulling a form from a file cabinet. She nodded. He sighed and slid the clipboard across the counter. "Fill that out." There was no offer of a seat, no pen, no follow-up questions. Claire glanced at the form. Generic, detached, completely impersonal. A bureaucratic formality for someone they clearly didn't care to help. "I need someone to take a statement," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor she felt rising in her chest. Officer Monroe leaned back in his chair and motioned to a younger cop across the room. "Hey, Bennett, we got another one." Claire flinched. Another one. Officer Bennett, barely out of his 20s with a jawline he probably thought made him intimidating, strode over with the same careless energy she remembered from high school jocks. He gave her a cursory glance. "You the one who got into a spat with her boyfriend?" Claire's blood turned cold. "He's not my boyfriend." "Right," Bennett said, nodding like he'd heard it all before. "Let's go to interview room B." He didn't wait for her to follow. She tightened her grip on her purse and walked behind him, her boots echoing sharply on the floor. The corridor smelled of ammonia and coffee, the fluorescent lights buzzing above like angry insects. Interview room B was as bleak as she expected. White walls, a metal table, 2 chairs, and a mirror she knew was one-way glass. As she sat, Bennett flipped open a notepad. "Name?" "Claire Whitman." His eyes flicked up. "Whitman? Are you Dale Whitman's daughter?" She nodded slowly. "Huh. Didn't think you still lived around here." "I don't." There was a pause. "So, who hit you?" She swallowed. "A man named Andrew Keller. We were dating. He hit me last night during an argument." "Where's he now?" "I don't know. I left." He scribbled a note. "Any witnesses?" "No." "Any prior record? His or mine?" Bennett looked up, surprised by her tone. "He has a history," she said. "Nothing on file, I'm sure, but this wasn't the first time." He made another note. "You staying in town?" "I am now." She watched as he yawned mid-note. Claire's fists clenched. "Is this how you treat all victims?" He stopped writing. "Look, Miss Whitman, we get a lot of calls like this. People say things, then take them back. We're not miracle workers. File the report and we'll take it from there." "No, you won't," she said calmly. "You'll file it, forget it, and hope I go away." The room went still. Bennett gave a half-smile. "What do you want from us, then?" Claire stood slowly, her eyes burning. "Not your sympathy, just your attention." She walked out before he could respond. Back in the front room, she passed the front desk again, but something stopped her. A file folder, half open on Monroe's desk, had a photograph peeking out. A photo of a girl, dirty blonde hair, young, eyes wide with something that wasn't quite fear but close. Claire paused. "Who's that?" Monroe looked up, annoyed. "Old case. Don't worry about it." "What case?" He scoffed. "Some girl went missing 15 years ago. Emily something, cold file." "Emily Kavanaugh?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Monroe looked at her, surprised. "Yeah, you knew her?" Claire didn't answer. Instead, she stared at the image. It was a class photo, 8th grade maybe. Emily had lived just 2 houses down from her growing up. Sweet girl, quiet, gone without a trace one spring evening, and the town had never fully recovered. Claire's pulse quickened. Something about the file. Something about the corner of a newspaper clipping she caught just beneath the photo made her uneasy. Her mind, always quick to pick up what others ignored, registered the date printed at the top. 2 days before Emily disappeared. She leaned in. "Can I see that?" "No," Monroe barked. "Now if you're done wasting our time." Claire turned and walked out without another word. Outside, the sun was brighter, but she didn't notice. Her feet carried her down Main Street, past the bakery and the silent church, and the benches where old men played checkers in summer. 15 years ago, this town buried something. And now, by sheer accident or divine intervention, she'd found a corner of it peeking through. They didn't care who she was. They didn't want to hear her story. But that was their mistake, because Claire Whitman had just remembered something no one else had. And she wasn't going away. The walk back to her late aunt's house, the small 2-bedroom tucked behind a grove of maple trees, felt longer than it should have. Claire moved like a woman with too much on her shoulders, not just from last night's bruises or this morning's humiliation, but from something deeper, something waking up inside her. She hadn't thought about Emily Kavanagh in years. Back when Claire was 20, the pain of leaving Oakridge had been outweighed only by the relief of escape. This place had been a cage, too many whispers, too many eyes that never blinked but always judged. But Emily had been one of the few soft spots in Claire's childhood. A year younger, always tagging along, curious, sweet. Claire used to help her with math homework on the porch steps just to avoid going inside. And then one spring day Emily was gone. No scream, no blood, just gone. The town had searched, prayed, speculated. For months there were candlelight vigils, yellow ribbons tied around trees, and faces contorted with sympathy that never quite reached the eyes. Then, slowly, the ribbons disappeared. The photos came down. And Oakridge went quiet again. Claire had forgotten the details. Or maybe she had chosen to. Until today. Once inside the house, she locked the door, slid her back against it, and sank to the floor. Her hands trembled as she pressed her forehead to her knees. She could have stayed in New Jersey, could have avoided this place forever. But the truth was, the moment Andrew hit her, and she saw something in his eyes that reminded her of her father's, she knew she had to come back. Not for healing, not for family, just to feel something she hadn't in years. Resolve. And now, she felt it burning. That afternoon, Claire pulled an old cardboard box from the hallway closet marked Junk Oakridge Days. Inside were photos, notes, and old yearbooks from high school, things she couldn't bring herself to throw away. She sat cross-legged on the floor and flipped through them until she found it. The 8th grade yearbook. Emily's photo stared up at her, frozen in time. She wasn't imagining things. The picture in the police file, same clothes, same background, it was the same photo. But what was it doing in a folder dated 2 days before she vanished? Something didn't add up. Claire scanned the names under the class photo, the teachers, the events. One stood out. Field trip to Briar Hollow Forest Preserve, April 11th, 2009. Her breath caught. That was the day. The exact day. She remembered it now. Emily had been there that morning. Claire saw her near the picnic tables, laughing with a group of girls. But by that evening, she was gone. Claire flipped to the back pages, handwritten signatures, scribbled messages. One in purple ink caught her attention. "Thanks for helping me with algebra. You're the only one who's nice to me. Emily C." Her chest tightened. She closed the yearbook and sat in silence. There was something else, some loose thread tugging at her memory, but it hadn't surfaced yet. She needed more information, and the Oakridge Police Department wasn't going to give it to her. So she decided to go to the library. The Oakridge Public Library hadn't changed either, still smelled like lemon cleaner and mildew. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gelman, looked up from her desk as Claire entered, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Claire Whitman," she said slowly, pushing her glasses up. "Thought you left town." "I did." Mrs. Gelman tilted her head. "Your aunt's house still standing?" "Barely." The librarian nodded, then gestured to the back room. "Archive section hasn't moved." Claire offered a quiet thank you and headed to the rear of the library, where old microfilms, newspaper stacks, and town records were kept in long metal drawers. She pulled everything dated April 2009. Hours passed. Dust clung to her sleeves, headlines blurred together. Then finally, Oakridge Gazette, April 12, 2009. Local girl reported missing. Authorities are searching for 13-year-old Emily Kavanagh, last seen around 3:15 p.m. during a school field trip to Briar Hollow. According to classmates, Emily was separated from the group shortly before departure. The sheriff's office has initiated a formal search. Foul play has not been ruled out. Claire's fingers ran over the ink. Her mind flared with questions. Why was there no mention of the 2-day gap? Why had the officers today been so dismissive of a girl's disappearance that once froze this town with fear? She flipped through the following day's papers: updates, search efforts, rumors. Then on April 19th, police scale-back search for missing teen Sheriff Dean Mallory announced that active searches for Emily Kavanagh would be scaled back due to lack of new evidence. The case remains open, but inactive. All leads have been followed, Mallory said. We'll continue to pursue any new information. Claire's pulse quickened. Dean Mallory. He was still chief, the same man who'd ignored her this morning. One line in the article stood out. The last person to reportedly see Emily was a classmate, Lucas Greer, who stated she wandered off looking for a quiet place to read. Lucas Greer. She hadn't heard that name in years. Claire dropped the papers and stood. The room suddenly felt stifling. Something was wrong, very wrong. She gathered her things and left the library without saying a word. That night, Claire sat at her aunt's kitchen table with a legal pad and pen. She began writing names. Emily Kavanagh, missing Lucas Greer, last seen with her Dean Mallory. Chief then and now April 11th, 2009. Field trip date April 13th, 2009. File date she saw today. At the bottom of the page, she wrote one question. Why was that photo in a file created before Emily disappeared? And underneath that, in all caps, who wanted her gone? Claire didn't sleep that night. She lay on the couch with a blanket pulled over her and stared at the ceiling, haunted by a girl's face and a town's silence. Tomorrow she would find Lucas Greer. She had to, because someone in Oakridge had buried the truth and she was done being quiet. The next morning the sky hung heavy with grey clouds, casting a dim pall over Oakridge that matched Claire's growing unease. The kind of morning where the world felt reluctant to wake up, but Claire was already in motion, coffee in a to-go mug, keys in hand, notebook in her purse. Her bruises had started to fade, but the sting from the police station hadn't. She drove past familiar streets, her eyes scanning for signs of change. Oakridge had stayed nearly frozen in time, save for a few new coffee shops and an overpriced boutique that didn't belong. The people, the politics, and the prejudice, those remained untouched. Claire parked outside the town hall where she'd heard Lucas Greer worked maintenance. She hadn't seen him since high school. Back then he was lanky and awkward, always buried in sketchbooks and horror novels, often the target of cruel jokes. But he had something Emily didn't. He survived this town. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed low above the front desk. Claire approached a woman tapping away at a keyboard. "Hi," Claire said. "Is Lucas Greer working today?" The woman looked up. "Yeah, think he's in the records room downstairs. Take the elevator to B1, turn right." Claire thanked her and walked toward the elevator, heart pounding. She wasn't sure what she expected. Denial, evasion, or worse, silence. But she had to know. She needed to understand what Lucas had seen that day. The basement was dim and musty, lined with boxes and metal shelves. At the end of the corridor, she found a door propped open by a mop bucket. Inside, Lucas stood on a stepladder, replacing a fluorescent bulb. His back was to her. "Lucas," she called. He turned, blinking in surprise. His face had changed. Older, broader, beard scruffy and uneven, but his eyes still had that familiar darting nervousness. "Claire Whitman?" he asked cautiously. She nodded. "It's been a long time." "Yeah," he said, stepping down from the ladder. "Didn't expect to see you back here." "Didn't expect to be," she replied. "Can I talk to you?" It's about Emily Kavanagh. His face froze. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he slowly removed his work gloves, set them aside and motioned to a bench just outside the room. They sat in silence for a long moment. "You were the last person to see her," Claire said softly. He looked down at his hands. "That's what they said, yeah?" "What happened, Lucas?" "I don't know," he said quickly. "That's what I told them. She said she was going to sit under that big oak tree, the one near the clearing. She had a book in her hand. That's the last I saw of her, I swear." "Did you hear anything, see anyone else?" He shook his head. "No, not that day, but something happened the day before. I never told anyone." Claire leaned in. "What was it?" He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "I saw Emily crying outside the school. It was after lunch. She was talking to someone in a car. Dark blue sedan, tinted windows. I couldn't see the driver." "Did you recognize the car?" "No, but I remember the plate started with JYH. I don't know why. It just stuck with me." Claire pulled her notebook from her purse and wrote it down. "Why didn't you tell the police?" He laughed bitterly. "Because I was already the freak who was last seen with her. My mum begged me to keep my mouth shut, said they'd twist it, said they'd blame me." Claire felt a chill run down her spine. "Did they ever question you seriously?" "Twice. Then they stopped calling, said they'd circle back if needed." He shook his head. "They didn't want answers. They wanted it to go away." She believed him. "You think someone took her?" Claire asked. Lucas hesitated. "I don't know, but I don't think she just disappeared, and I know the police didn't try hard enough." Claire stood, a quiet fire building inside her. "I'm going to find out what happened." Lucas looked up at her, eyes flickering with a mix of hope and fear. "If you dig too deep, they'll come for you too." She met his gaze. "Let them." That afternoon, Claire went to the DMV. It took nearly 2 hours, but with a fake story about a missing relative and a forgotten license plate, she convinced a weary employee to run a partial plate match from 2009. Only one result came back: JYH 6287, registered to a Charles R. Kellerman. Her stomach twisted. Charles Kellerman, the former head of the Oak Ridge School Board, respected, connected, untouchable. He died 2 years ago. But Claire remembered his wife, Helen Kellerman, still active in church and charity events, and their son, Greg Kellerman, who used to be one of the high school's golden boys. A sudden memory struck her. Emily once said she hated going to tutoring after school because he stares too long. At the time, Claire thought she meant the math teacher, but now she wasn't so sure. She pulled her coat tighter around her and stepped outside. The air was crisp. The truth was rising like smoke under a closed door. Someone in that car knew what happened to Emily, and now Claire knew where to look next. That evening, Claire drove by the Kellerman estate. It was still enormous, gated, pristine, sitting like a castle above the town. She didn't stop, not yet. But she watched the lights go on. Someone in that house knew something, and tomorrow she'd knock on their door, not as a victim, but as a woman unraveling the truth. Claire didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her aunt's guest bed, the old comforter twisted at her knees, her phone in hand, screen dark. Outside, the wind blew in sharp gusts, rattling the windows like impatient fingers tapping to get in. Her mind was spiraling, pieces locking into place she didn't even know she had. A forgotten license plate, a powerful family, a girl who cried the day before she vanished, and a system too eager to forget. When morning came, Claire was already dressed. Jeans, boots, a grey wool coat, no makeup, just a bruised face and a look that warned she wasn't playing anymore. She drove to the Kellerman estate with the precision of someone preparing for battle. The driveway curved in a perfect semicircle, like a ribbon tied around a secret. The house was just as she remembered, grand, colonial style, the kind that wore wealth like cologne. She pressed the buzzer at the gate. A voice crackled through the intercom. Female. Crisp. "Yes? Hi, this is Claire Whitman. I used to live here in Oak Ridge. So I'm doing some follow-up on the Emily Kavanagh case for a local history project. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about the early 2000s. Your husband was on the school board, right? A pause. Then, wait by the gate. 2 minutes later, the iron gate creaked open. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected it to be that easy. Helen Kellerman stood on the front porch in a navy blue blouse and cream-colored slacks, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun. She looked like a politician's widow, refined, sharp, and guarded. "Claire Whitman," she said, squinting. "You were friends with the Whittaker girl, weren't you?" "Briefly," Claire replied. "Thank you for seeing me. I don't have much time. I won't take much." They walked through the polished foyer into a sitting room lined with photos and old books. Claire noticed Greg's graduation photo still on the mantel. A younger version of him stared out, all smug charm and perfect teeth. "Charles always thought well of Emily," Helen said, pouring coffee into porcelain cups. "Such a sweet girl, her disappearance was a tragedy." Claire accepted the coffee but didn't drink it. "Did your husband ever mention anything unusual around that time?" Helen's expression didn't flicker. "You'll have to be more specific." "Did he ever express concern about any students, or about someone being in trouble?" "No." A pause. "Why are you asking me these questions now?" Claire looked her in the eye. "Because someone in a dark blue sedan with your family's plates was seen talking to Emily the day before she disappeared." The cup paused halfway to Helen's lips. "I don't know what you're implying," she said coldly. "I'm not implying anything, I'm stating a fact." Helen stood. "I think we're done here." Claire rose as well. "Was Greg driving that day?" "I said we're done." "Mrs. Kellerman, you need to leave." Claire nodded slowly and turned for the door. As she reached the foyer, Helen's voice followed her. "You're stirring up ghosts that don't need waking." Claire didn't look back. Maybe that's exactly what they need. She drove straight to Lucas Greer's apartment. It was modest, tucked above a laundromat on the edge of town. When he opened the door, his expression said he wasn't surprised to see her again so soon. "I spoke to Helen Kellerman," Claire said without greeting. "She shut down the moment I mentioned the plate." Lucas stepped aside to let her in. The place smelled of old pizza and motor oil, but it was neat. He pulled a chair out for her. "Greg," he said. "You think it was Greg?" Claire nodded. "I'm not sure what role he played, but he's connected. Emily didn't like being around him, said he made her uncomfortable." "I remember that now," Lucas said. "He used to hang around the field during recess, even though he'd graduated, just watching." Claire felt a chill run down her spine. "I need more," she said. "Something solid. If I go to the police now, they'll bury it." Lucas hesitated, then walked to a cabinet and pulled out a faded composition notebook. "I didn't tell you this before," he said, setting it in front of her, "but after Emily went missing, I kept notes, just in case. Names, patterns, things that didn't sit right." Claire opened it. Page after page was filled with observations, times, places, people Emily had spoken to. One entry in particular stopped her cold. April 10th, 2009, Emily got into a blue sedan after school. Greg driving. She looked scared. She looked up at Lucas. "You saw this?" He nodded. "I panicked. I told myself I imagined it. But when she went missing, I knew I hadn't." Claire's fingers dug into the table's edge. "You're the only one who's kept any of this alive." Lucas's eyes watered slightly. "She was just a kid. I should have done more." "You're doing it now." That night, Claire went home and scanned every note from Lucas's book. She created a timeline, cross-checked it with public records, yearbooks, and articles. The pieces were falling into place. Greg Kellerman had access, motive, proximity, and most of all, protection. No one had wanted to believe it. Not back then, not now. But Claire wasn't asking for belief. She was going to force the truth into the light. She picked up her phone and called the one person she didn't want to call, Detective Sarah Lynn. Formerly of Oak Ridge PD, now working in Pittsburgh, they hadn't spoken in over a decade. Claire left a voicemail. "It's Claire Whitman. I need to talk to you. It's about Emily Kavanaugh, and I think I've found what everyone else missed." As she ended the call, a knock echoed through the quiet house. Claire froze. Another knock, harder this time. She walked slowly to the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. Her eyes narrowed. She opened the door just a crack, and there on the porch floor was a single manila envelope. She picked it up. No return address. Just one word, scrawled in thick black ink. Stop. Claire stared at the manila envelope in her hands, heart pounding like a war drum. The word on it, stop, wasn't a request. It was a warning. A threat, silent but screaming. She stepped back inside, bolted the door, and pulled all the curtains shut before turning on a single dim light above the kitchen sink. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside were 4 items. A photo of Claire walking out of Lucas Greer's apartment that morning. A screenshot of her car parked in front of the Kellerman estate. A printed copy of her police intake form from her assault report, one that should have only been seen by officers. A note. Typed. Precise. Cold. You're not the first to dig. The last one disappeared. Think carefully before becoming the next ghost this town forgets. Claire's knees nearly gave out. Someone was watching her. Worse, someone inside the system had leaked her private report. The message was clear. Stop asking questions or pay the price. But fear wasn't new to Claire. She'd been afraid of her father's rage, of Andrew's hands, of being ignored, overlooked, dismissed. But this was a different kind of fear. This was validation. She was close, and someone was scared of what she'd find. She called Lucas immediately. He answered after the second ring. Hey, I got a warning. What? They know I talked to you. Someone took pictures. They're watching me. There was silence on the line. Claire lowered her voice. Who else would have had access to my intake form? Only the officers in the station, Lucas said. And the chief. Mallory, Claire muttered. Of course. I told you, Claire, if you keep digging. I'm not stopping, she interrupted. But I'm being followed. We both need to be careful. Lucas sighed. What are you going to do? I left a message for Sarah Lynn, the detective who moved to Pittsburgh. She was one of the only decent ones. She didn't buy the official story back then, but they pulled her off the case before she could dig too deep. You think she'll help? I don't know, Claire whispered. But if she doesn't, I'll keep going alone. 2 hours later, Claire's phone buzzed, a Pittsburgh number. She answered immediately. Sarah? Claire Whitman? The voice was older, firmer than Claire remembered, but it still carried that same quiet steel. Yes, thank you for calling back. You said this is about Emily Kavanaugh. I found something. Things that were never followed up. And now I'm being threatened. There was a pause on the line. Where are you? Sarah asked. Oak Ridge, my aunt's old house. I'll be there by morning. Don't speak to anyone else. Don't go anywhere alone. And whatever you have, copy it. Claire exhaled in relief. I've got a timeline, witness statements, even a license plate. The Kellermans are involved, Sarah. I'm sure of it. I remember that name, Sarah said. They made a lot of noise when I got too close. Sit tight. I'm coming. It was just past 1 a.m. when Claire heard the sound of tires crunching gravel. She sat upright on the couch, heart racing. She hadn't told anyone else where she was staying. The headlights didn't stop in front of the house. They circled it. She grabbed the fire poker from the fireplace and stood near the window, barely breathing. The car idled for a moment, then drove off. Claire knew what it was, intimidation. But it had the opposite effect. They were scared. Scared enough to follow her, scare her, silence her. She wasn't backing down. The next morning, Claire met Sarah Lynn in person for the first time in over a decade. The detective had aged, yes, but there was more fire in her now than before. Dressed in plain clothes, hair pulled back, Sarah looked at Claire like she already believed her. You look like hell, Sarah said. Been a rough few days. They sat in the kitchen with coffee and the file Claire had compiled. Sarah flipped through it, eyes narrowing. This, she said, tapping on the DMV printout, is enough to get a warrant. If Kellerman was the last to see her. Lucas says he saw Emily get in his car the day before she disappeared, Claire added. And there's a note from Emily herself in my yearbook saying she didn't feel safe. Sarah leaned back. Why now? Claire exhaled. Because I was ignored. Because I went to the police for my own assault and got laughed at. And because this town is rotting underneath all its polite lies. Sarah looked impressed. You're braver than most of the people I used to work with. I'm just tired of being silent. That afternoon, Sarah visited the Oak Ridge Police Department under the pretense of consulting on an old case. She asked to review the original Kavanaugh file. The folder they handed her was barely 12 pages. Most of it was fluff. No photos, no records of interviews with the Kellermans, no mention of Lucas's name. She returned to Claire's house with her jaw clenched. They gutted it, she said. There's nothing left in that file. They didn't just ignore it, they erased it. Who has the authority to do that? Sarah's eyes darkened. The chief, maybe the mayor, but this runs deep. Claire nodded. Then we go deeper. That night, Sarah pulled some strings. She used a contact at the state police to quietly request a forensic review of Emily's case, reopening it under the radar. It would take time. Bureaucracy moved like molasses. But Claire didn't need the state to finish what she started. The next morning, she returned to the Kellerman estate. This time, she didn't ring the bell. She waited until Helen left in her car and snuck around the back fence. Through the window, she saw Greg Kellerman inside, now in his late 30s, disheveled, pacing, drinking. Claire snapped a photo of him through the glass. He looked nothing like the golden boy he once was. Suddenly, Greg looked toward the window. Their eyes met. Claire didn't run. She lifted her phone and pressed record. "I know what you did," she mouthed through the glass. Greg froze. His hand tightened on the glass in his hand. Claire turned and walked away. She didn't have all the proof yet, but she had a witness, she had a detective, and she had fear on her side now because Greg Kellerman knew the silence he thought would last forever was cracking. Claire didn't return home after staring Greg Kellerman in the eyes. She went straight to Sarah Lynn's hotel, her fingers trembling as she showed her the video. The recording wasn't long, just 20 seconds, but it captured everything. Greg pacing, glass in hand, the moment he spotted Claire through the window, and the look of frozen horror on his face when she mouthed the words, "I know what you did." "That's not a confession," Sarah said cautiously, "but that's a man whose secrets are waking up." "He was afraid," Claire said. "He knows it's coming." Sarah rubbed her temple, thinking fast. "We have to tighten this, bring in Lucas again. We'll need to get him on the record before someone gets to him." Claire's blood chilled. "You think they'll try to silence him?" "I think they already tried to silence you." By midday, Sarah arranged an off-the-record meeting between Lucas, a state investigator, and herself. Lucas was pale and visibly anxious, but when Claire placed a hand on his arm, his voice steadied. He told them everything. About Emily getting into the Kellerman's blue sedan, about Greg driving, about the fear on Emily's face, about the fact that she had no reason to be near Greg after school hours. He had already graduated. About how, when Emily disappeared the next day, he'd gone to the police and they'd done nothing. About the notebook, the memory, the guilt. And when he finished, the room was silent. Then the investigator, a quiet man with sharp eyes, leaned forward. "I believe you," he said. "But belief doesn't get us charges. We need corroboration, something physical." Claire stood. "Then we find it. The town tried to bury a child. Not anymore." That evening, everything broke open. A call came in while Claire was back at her aunt's house preparing dinner. It was Sarah. "Greg's gone." Claire nearly dropped the phone. "What?" "Packed a bag, emptied his bank accounts, took off from his house an hour ago. No official warrant had been issued yet, but someone tipped him off." Claire's stomach dropped. "You think it was the police?" "I think the entire system's infected, but it doesn't matter anymore. We're going public." The next day, Claire went to the press. Standing on the steps of the Oak Ridge courthouse, with Sarah beside her and cameras rolling, Claire held nothing back. She told the world about the night she walked into the station for help and was humiliated. She told them about Emily Kavanaugh, the forgotten girl, the cold case that was never properly investigated, the Kellermans, the vehicle, the timeline, the photos, the witness testimony. She told them about how the town buried the truth to protect its favorites. And then she did something no one expected. She held up the manila envelope with the word "Stop" scrawled on it. "They told me to stop," she said, voice steady. "They tried to scare me, but I am not afraid anymore. And I will not stop until justice is done." The crowd went silent. Only the cameras clicked. For a moment, Oakridge stopped pretending. Within hours, the story spread. National news picked it up. Cold case reignited by domestic assault victim turned citizen investigator. Claire's name trended on social media. Some people called her brave, others called her crazy. But no one could deny she'd cracked open something Oakridge had worked 15 years to keep buried. The state launched an internal investigation into the Oakridge Police Department. Officer Munro was suspended. Chief Mallory resigned under pressure. And most damning of all, Greg Kellerman was caught trying to cross into Canada with fake documents 2 days later. When interrogated, he crumbled. The confession wasn't glorious, it wasn't even clear at first. But slowly, through tears and anger and avoidance, Greg admitted that he had been with Emily that day, that she wanted to tell someone what he'd done to her, that she threatened to go to her mother, that he panicked, that he didn't mean to hurt her. But he had. And then, he'd made sure she would never speak again. He left her in a shallow grave deep inside Briar Hollow, just beyond the old field trip site. Search teams found her remains 3 days after his confession. Emily was finally brought home. Claire didn't cry when the news broke. She stood beneath the old oak tree near the clearing where Emily had last been seen, and placed a single white flower in the grass. The town watched from a distance. Some applauded her. Others couldn't meet her eyes. None of that mattered. What mattered was that the girl no one listened to had finally been heard. Months passed. Lucas testified during the trial. His quiet voice trembled, but held firm. Sarah Lynn returned to Pittsburgh, now decorated for her role in solving the case. And Claire. Claire stayed in Oakridge, not because she loved it, but because it needed someone like her now. She opened a small non-profit office downtown, the Whitman Center for Justice and Advocacy, offering support for women who'd been ignored, dismissed, or mistreated by the legal system. Survivors like herself, like Emily. She refused interviews after the first few months. She didn't want fame. She wanted purpose. And purpose she'd finally found. One autumn morning, nearly a year after Emily's body had been laid to rest, Claire stood on the front porch of her office with a fresh cup of coffee in hand. The leaves danced along the pavement, and a light breeze carried the sound of church bells down Main Street. A teenage girl approached shyly. Her arm was in a sling, her eyes were tired, haunted. Claire didn't need to ask. She recognized the look. The girl stopped in front of her. Are you the woman from the news?" Claire smiled softly. "I was. Come inside, it's warm."